Hello and welcome to the Irish Independent throw-in football show ahead of the All-Ireland final between Armagh and Galway. And we're just over a pulsating, epic All-Ireland hurling final between Cork and Clare yesterday. It's Monday afternoon and I think we're still feeling the after effects of that. Heads have barely turned towards a football final. Donnchadh, you were there yesterday. It really was something else. I suppose the question is the football final now a poor relation after that?
Well, I think the hurling final has been in rare form, even by its own standards. The hurling championship, I think if you go back to that Cork-Limerick game a couple of weeks ago, it was an epic in its own right. And after yesterday, it probably wasn't even the best hurling game in the last fortnight. So it's just an extraordinary day yesterday. And I think one of the big things about the close season is, and there's loads of arguments to be made for and against it, but one of the big things is that the two finals in particular are so squeezed. You know, they are huge occasions, both of them in their own right. Yeah. And here we are Monday afternoon and we are moving on to the football final by pure necessity. And there's nothing else to do, but yesterday was incredible and one of those things where it was genuinely a privilege to be there to see it.
And Philly, did you ever get that as a player, that element of hurling snobbery? We have the greatest game in the world and the comparisons, and was there ever an inferiority complex?
Yeah, all the time, and it's still, now that I'm retired, you still get it, but it's wrong. There should not be, like, they're two different sports. Why do we always as GE people compare them?
Yeah,
right. It's just crazy. So for me, you know, hurling is just incredible sport. I've very rarely been let down by a final unless there was a big kind of underdog in it, like, you know, Limerick winning by a big margin a few years ago, or like Kilkenny a few years. It's always like competitive. It's always, you know, going to be tight, and it's just 100 mile an hour. And I was obviously watching it on BBC, and it's interesting then when you're watching it on BBC, you cannot take your eyes off Twitter because you've all these people from across the water up the north, or people have never seen the sport before. And there was a tweet a guy had, he says, "What is this hurling? It's like a mixture of UFC, baseball, and he said, and an egg and spoon race, all in the same one." And you know, that's the difference. It's very unique when you look at football, and that is probably broadcast around the world. People looking in and going, "Oh, football actually, you know, there's a connection there with maybe soccer or other sports that are football related." So hurling's very kind of unique. You can say, yeah, maybe baseball or hockey or whatever, but it's just unique, I think, for me, and it does give that kind of feeling around warriors, and again, that kind of feeds into my feeling around football, where that needs to get to. Instead of changing rules, it needs to get back to, you know, physicality and hits and the refs letting it flow, and I think that's why people compare hurling to football so much.
Philly's not that long gone, and his team and Mayo produced some of the greatest football.
Yeah.
Like, that's a very recent history.
No, that's for sure. And you mentioned the physical element, and we've a very novel pairing between Armagh and Galway, but they're also two of the most physical teams in football right now. And in many ways, they're perfectly matched up. Size, combativeness, everything like that. So it is a great final. We're talking about hurling, but it's a great final in prospect too.
Yeah, I do. I think these two teams know each other really well. I don't think there's much in the two of them. I think both of them have knocked out the favourites, Kerry and Dublin. And you can't use that now as like, oh, well, Galway have beaten Dublin, so they should be the favourites. But for me, obviously, the advantage to Galway is that they've been there the last few years. Armagh haven't. But I'm really fascinated by Armagh because of the adversity they've come through, not only this year but last year, and how they've bounced back. I think that's a strength. I think that perseverance, you know, you don't realise, you know, how much negativity comes around not winning an Ulster Championship. It is bonkers up the north. And the amount of people that you'd hear headhunting McGeeney, and he's just basically turned around and said, we'll block all that noise out and let's get on to the All-Ireland series, which is impressive. And it shows the character of the group that now they're in All-Ireland final. You know, Joyce, for me, when I played against Galway and Joyce was the manager, he was very vocal on the sidelines, and it wasn't something that I'd like in a manager. And but he's proved that doesn't really matter what I think. He's got them to the final again, and maybe Bernard Dunn settled them down a little bit. I don't know, but definitely they've got a serious team. They've a serious balance throughout the team, and we please don't bring up the only problem with Galway is their injuries, because we've been saying that the last 3 games now. So I just hope that there's 2 full strength teams and they go at it.
We mentioned the physical elements, and that is something that you would associate with Armagh, Donnchadh over the last 10 years under Kieran McGeeney, but previous teams too. It is very, very much a badge of honour for an Armagh footballer not to recoil from any type of confrontation. That's been their way over many, many years.
Yeah, I would say as well, having covered the press night last Monday night, that not that they recoil from that, but there probably is maybe laid at their door a little bit more than they feel is deserved, given that anyone playing football at this stage of competition, that's just an entry-level requirement. You have to be physical and you have to be muscular and you have to make your presence felt. There's no way around that the way the game is played at the minute. It's interesting from the press night in Armagh. I was in the Carrickdale Hotel last Monday night. One of the big things that came across was that even if you go back to last winter for Kieran McGeeney, and there was a vote on his future, which he won pulling up with a bit to spare, when by the time the executive was put into it as well, is around 70% of the delegates went his way. One of the big things you took from it, that even at times they felt like that group have this mentality that it's just them, and that includes the people within Armagh who wanted Kieran McGeeney, thought his time was done, that 9 years was enough, he didn't need a 10th year. So Philly touched on it earlier, they're a very, very tight-knit group, and that is they've come through an awful lot. Like if you go back to McGeeney's first 4 years, like unmapped, absolutely unmapped in Ulster. First 8 championships, I think something like 3 wins in Ulster, and now here they are, and they kind of feel like they've got there on their own steam, and that's potentially a very powerful thing. But
the crucial thing as well, don't forget, is the people that were screaming from McGeeney's head, they have to understand Armagh have only ever won one All-Ireland, albeit that was said, a few years, they've only ever won one. And I spoke to a guy from Armagh, I won't mention his name, and he mentioned 2 other lads that should be there as managers, because I said, well, who else is there then? And he mentioned 2 other names. I said, well, McGeeney wins the All-Ireland. Do you still think that way? And just out of stubbornness, the person said, yeah. I was like, what do you mean? Like he's at the winning the ultimate prize for your county, and yet you still can't get over him. I said, that shows you how much political bias you have towards McGeeney, like, and that's every county has it, doesn't it? Like there's very few that do.
Character, isn't he? Like he just, one way or another, positively or negatively, he provokes comment. People love him or they hate him, but they're almost always talking about him. It's a remarkable thing.
I think it's pretty clear anyone who's been in a dressing room with him loves him, because they still talk about him in Kildare. He's gone out of Kildare. It's actually 11 years now he's out of Kildare, and they still talk about him, and they still regret the one vote that went against Kieran.
And there was also talk that he might go back in.
I would have heard that
there was a letter that time, wasn't there? There was a letter by the squad.
But even now in the last few months, you would hear maybe he'd be part of a coaching ticket. Again, no substance to it, but that's the way they're thinking and talking. And it always struck me how players talked about him, almost in the same way as Brian Lohan yesterday, the way the Clare players spoke about so glowingly. The Armagh players were very much circled around Kieran McGeeney and I don't think there was only pockets in Armagh last year. Let's face it, it wasn't a huge movement to oust him. But it's still an act of faith after 9 years. No matter how much Armagh have won or lost over the years, it's still an act of faith to keep a manager after 9 years, but ultimately one that's paid off.
Well, I think there's other counties that definitely fall into the trap of doing the opposite, and they're rotating managers, particularly in Leinster. There's a constant rotation, and there's a very small pool of people out there, and particularly new people coming into the game that maybe are ex-county players or otherwise. And progress takes time. It really does, and you have to learn how to lose before you learn how to win. And that's key for that. I think that's his evolution was key to building up so much hurt and keep coming back, that eventually that use that as an armory to say, nobody thinks we can do this. But in this dressing room, and that's that siege mentality that I would feel McGeeney has with that group, and you see it in other sports. You see it in Damien Duff in Shells. Like, if you don't have an unbelievably talented team, and they do have talent, don't get me wrong, but we're talking about the top tier, they were never seen as the top tier. They were never seen as a team that were going to get to the All-Ireland final this year. Potential, yes, but not, they weren't sitting at the start of between the league and this championship with Derry, Dublin and Kerry. They're the three that were sitting at the top table. I would have seen it anyway, in my opinion.
Very much so. After the league final, you would say, yes, Derry are the third arm of this All-Ireland title race, and the rest are in the pack just behind. I am of the belief that McGeeney has maximised he's got more than the sum of the parts out of Armagh. If you look at their underage record, it's not laden with Ulster titles like Tyrone and now Derry. It just isn't. And even Crossmaglen are not the force that they once were. So it's fair to say he has got more out of them than he should have. Yeah,
and I'm sure we'll come on to it, but he has at least 7 or 8 really good options off the bench. And that is built over time and time. Like Charlie O'Burns, I thought was brilliant in extra time the last time, but only 3 years ago it would have been inconceivable that Armagh would win a game of real consequence in the championship in Croke Park without him being a central figure of it. And now they've built themselves to such a spot.
And he hasn't played in too many games at all.
And was almost lost to them as well.
Hasn't been part of the 5 subs coming on through the group stages. So it is testament. And I would think Ross McQuillan, a player like Ross McQuillan, probably would have started on the Kerry team because of his pace. It's something that
definitely at the club scene they would talk so much about that fella. Like, if he's not playing, like that shows you the strength of the squad. But it definitely stood out for me against Kerry when they could bring those boys back in. They had a few lads, and like Nugent for me has been a really standout Armagh forward over the last 5 or 10 years. Struggled maybe in form, and he gave him the benefit of the doubt, made a couple of mistakes that took him off when they needed it, but then they had Soupy Campbell come off the bench, and there was just strength and depth that you looked at Kerry and you went, I don't see that coming off the Kerry bench, But for me, I think it's when you look at Armagh, I agree that they've got to it. He's squeezed the potential out of them, but I still think there's more. I don't think that performance on a year that Kerry and Dublin are doing extremely well. They're hitting their KPIs. Their performances are really high, which we didn't see this year off both of them. I would debate if that performance that Armagh had would be good enough to win an All-Ireland. So I still think there's growth there. I still think they're doing silly little things like, they got a serious amount of turnovers in Kerry's full back line, let's say, in their full forward line, and you see players doing certain things, and you're just like, that's for you to win 1, maybe 2, maybe 3 All-Irelands. They're the things you're going to have to iron out, and that's where they see the potential in them, as well as McGeeney taking them above the level that most people will see them at.
That was the big thing that was thrown at them, wasn't it? Look, no championship silverware, no big scalp in Croke Park. And it's just very interesting.
And losing penalties.
Well, you can forgive the penalties. I think you can always forgive the penalties.
If you lose once, not if you lose 3 times.
Over the last 3 championship seasons is that since the Donegal Ulster quarter-final defeat, they've only lost 1 in something like 18 games in regulation time, and that was against Tyrone in last year's group stage when Rian O'Neill was sent off. In every other game, they've been level or won at the end of normal time, extra time. So they're an extremely hard team to beat. While they might struggle to win tight games on one hand, they're very, very difficult to beat, and they put together a great defence.
Yeah, well, that's the starting point as well, isn't it? We mentioned physicality, but defensive organisation, and the teams that aren't entirely tuned into what they're trying to do in a defensive sense fall away out of the championship very quickly. So I think you have the stats there, Keezer, in terms of what they've conceded.
Well, it's Armagh have conceded 3 championship goals this year, 2 to Down, and then the last day, obviously, but Galway have only conceded 1 goal from 9 championship games.
And
so
go back to that, the Kerry's All-Ireland win a couple of years ago, conceded 1 championship goal, I think, in that run, and that was Cormac Costello put it in the only spot the keeper couldn't get to it. It was an absolutely brilliant goal. So All-Ireland champions and All-Ireland champions elects are built on good defences.
Yeah, but they all play the same way, structurally, but it's not about just setting up, it's about doing it, and you could say take the jerseys off Galway and Armagh, Kerry and Dublin and whoever you want, they'll all look the same as a structure when you look at Croke Park, but the actual doing part is the key because there's no point saying, oh, we have a great structure, but we don't actually have the little good decisions. Like you see yesterday, I can't remember who it was, the foul in the clear player fouled in the last play of the game. And their little kind of concentration moments where Cork got the free and it went to extra time. That concentration endurance, that's about doing. That's about before the event happens, you're already thinking, right, you know, I've loads of bodies back here. There's no need for me to foul here. And that's just one thing that will happen in that structural defence, or it's the shift and left to right. You'll see Galway shift and they basically come off the blind side to decrease the space for you to get in behind and get goals. But for me, what has really evolved for Armagh is that there was a year where they were really good offensively. They were banging the ball in really fast, and then they were leaking goals.
That was probably 2022.
Yeah, and then the following year they done the opposite.
Yeah.
Where they were too defensive.
Around the league, actually.
Yeah, they were too defensive, and they were getting nothing from the offensive transition. And they've got a nice blend now. And again, look, McGuinness done it with Donnchadh when he first came in his first term. Really strong defensively, not really good offensively. The following year, he married that, and then they got an All-Ireland, you know.
Yeah, because I think they've introduced a lot of pace this year with some of the players. We mentioned Ross McQuillan, who's been around a while, but Peter McGrain, the cornerback, really quick, and then Oisin Connaughty, really, really fast. And obviously, they're using Jarlath O'Burns in a particular way as well. So they've built that element into their team to go quicker and counter quicker. But we mentioned the two managers, Pádraig Joyce and Kieran McGeeney, and the acts of faith in both. Even Pádraig Joyce, after his second year, he was after the Connacht final defeat in Croke Park. You know, he admitted himself he had to take a really wide look at things afterwards. With Dessie Farrell, they're the three longest-serving managers, so there's something in that as well. That you know, the faith has been kept in Pádraig Joyce, and he's really turned them around. Donnchadh, in the last 3 years, especially, they've been very competitive.
Yeah, I think he said himself when he came in first, and it's the kind of talk you don't often hear from managers, but he kind of said, listen, we're going to win All Irelands and we're going to do it the right way, was effectively what he says. And I suppose by the right way he meant we're going to play in front foot, maybe like his team in 98 and 2001 did, who were one of the most dazzling teams of the last 25 years. They were incredible, and they played that. But it just doesn't fly now. It just doesn't work. You can't play like that. You're just going to get picked apart. Inferior teams will beat you if you set up like that, if you just went out and went old school, we'll call it. But I think he's got very pragmatic very quickly. And as we touched on earlier, he has both the footballers and who have both the talent and the physical attributes to play the game at the level it has to be played at now to win, because they have big, huge, athletic men who are also very talented. And that's so hard to find.
The key with Joyce is, you know, in his term, you can be a legend to these lads, but if you don't win, it's very hard to get a buy-in. And if you're, depending on your style of manager, authoritarian type manager, or you're a caring manager, you have to win. And as soon as you get to All-Ireland finals, players can't question you then, your style and what you're trying to do and trying to achieve. And that's what he's done for me. I'm that person. I questioned, do you know what, he's screaming and effing on the sideline in Galway, and I'm not sure I like that as a manager. But then I have to kind of go back and think to myself, well, hold on a second. If he's getting Galway to All-Ireland finals, what does it matter? Like, that style is helping that group of players. Now, maybe it's changed, or maybe he still does that, but I'm kind of like, you know, I'm not a part of that group, and I do think ultimately winning gets the buy-in. The buy-in then creates the drive forward and the momentum.
And they've had it in tight games, because they won the Connacht final courtesy of a few frees at the end, but they still won that tight match. Same with Dublin. They came, took Dublin, and the last day, last 10 minutes, it only looked like one team was going to win it, and that was Galway.
Well, they know now how to break down the masters at that, you know, the hybrid defence, or whatever you want to call it, the blanket defence, and a team that we talk about siege mentality in McGeeney. I think where Donegal got to this year was based around that alignment piece of this group is going to fight and we're going to win an All. I have no doubt that McGuinness would have used similar psychological kind of theory that he had in the first stint he done, where he was telling lads, we're going to win an Ireland, we're going to win an Ireland, and that being an intention that brings them forward in the championship. Like, so to break that, I think that is a big win, just as big as a Dublin win. I really do, because you just don't understand the strength of an alignment of a team. You know, when everybody's fighting together for the one cause, that can get you over the line with underperforming. Whereas when you're a team that has huge talent, but they're not all thinking the same way or they're on the same frequency, that can pull you different directions. And I've been on those type of teams. Like, particularly, I will never forget the team I was in with DCU, with the Galacticos. It was like the year before we didn't have a good as a team, and we won a Sigerson. The year after we had a better team, and it was unbelievable to compete with any inter-county team, and it just was pulled apart. We just didn't align, we just didn't come together, you know. So I do think that's another step or another bow in the Galway kind of advancement into the final, that they did break down Donegal, and they've beaten already an expansive team in Dublin. So they have that ticked off. Now they have a mass defence type team ticked off. They've done it all, yeah.
And they're building they're building all of that. That's reserves. That's muscle memory in many ways, that they have so many of those scenarios. But Pádraig Joyce has not been afraid to make hard calls either, because John Daly was very pivotal for them. 2022, he was the centre back who sat back. He kicked the ball a lot. Fantastic passer of the ball. And they get turned over for the kick out against Armagh in Sligo last month. And John Daly doesn't make the team after. And it's been a very significant change. Liam Silk has gone to centre back, and a very fundamental shift in Galway's defence and how they play.
And an emergence of Dylan McHugh as well, which, well, not he was there, but he seems to have kicked on to the next level. I think the other thing about Galway is, and like, you would wonder when you go back to that All-Ireland final against Kerry, how many times have they had all of those players available at full mass since then? And between Liam Silk was away, injuries, Kieran McGeeney had injuries, who was also in that team, was an important player, you know, and there was always some reason, someone coming back, long seasons for Mike Cullen or Shane Walsh, and I often wondered how many times did have everyone at 100% of their fitness and available for them since then. I would guess, now only maybe the Galway S&C people would know this, but I would guess it's been pretty rare in the last couple of years that they've been able to call on anyone, and that's massive as well, because like obviously Silk has been brilliant.
But that's based off, like, the reason they are in an All-Ireland final with all of those adversities is because they have a strong system. Like, when you have a system and you have one or two players that are underperforming, you just plug in another person that can do that job. And that's the way the game has gone. Whereas years ago, you know, when it wasn't so tactical and systemised, it's like when you have 3 or 4 bodies down in tools, it's a house of cards. It falls apart. Well, the manager has too many fires to put out.
Going back quite a while, and like Rory O'Carroll left Dublin, and like it was like, oh jeez, Dublin are on the mist of something here, you know, and Rory just was going off to going to New Zealand or whatever. And we were all like, oh God, what's going to happen? And just anyone you talked to around Dublin that time was, well, look, we just get it. Like, Rory had solved the great full-back problem that existed
since Paddy Christie.
And I think there was that stat of 4 Leinster finals and 4 different full-backs that started them in a row around Pillar's time.
It was that bad that we had Paddy Andrews as a full-back.
Paddy Andrews,
cornerback against Kildare, wasn't it, in the Leinster final, and also Kerry in the 2009 All-Ireland.
Yeah, so that was, you know, but then it was just at that time, it was just someone else came in, and Rory, you know, not that he was forgotten about, but Dublin just kept on. You know, and that, I suppose, is the point you're making, isn't it? That there's just some.
Even you look at Limerick, the Limerick hurlers, the players that they have missed, Sean Finn and Cian Lynch, 2-time hurler of the year, didn't feature one year, and they've always there is a policy there of next man up. Now, they might have caught them this year. They had so many at different times that maybe it did catch up with them. But definitely the system. But within that system, there's a lot of individual flair in Galway if it's allowed to flourish and prosper by opponents. And obviously Damien Comer, fantastic ball winner, fantastic player, and Shane Walsh too. Shane Walsh has just great kicking ability, and we always expect him. Maybe the reason we think there's a higher ceiling, shall we say, there's more. You think there's more in Armagh to go, but there's a sense that there's more in Galway to go because of these players. Kieran McGeeney back off an injury. He's been going really well in the last few years.
Is really exciting to watch as well, like, because you're always watching so much on Walsh and Comer. Do you know what the interesting thing is? And again, you might be able to answer this more than me. I've never seen those two playing well together. I've never seen Walsh and Comer have unbelievable games together. Have you?
Not in the All-Ireland final 2 years ago, because Comer probably dipped in that, where he was very good against Derry when Walsh was tied up by Conor McCluskey. So it's a fair point. I'd probably have to go back to maybe some of the Connacht finals when, you know, way back when I'll have to think about that, but certainly in the more recent sense, in your right to a degree, Comer was good against Armagh. Walsh was probably held up a little bit by James Morgan. That was 2 years ago.
Probably purely
in that game.
Stylistically, Comer thrives when the ball's going in early and fast, and Walsh is probably at his best when he has the ball in his hand. He's the most. That's when you notice him the most, and the same with Comer. So they're nearly fly in each other's faces. Shane Walsh can't have the ball if the ball's going in early into Damien Comer. So I suppose there's a little bit of a balancing there. Did you have which or how many or how often did you get your hands on either of those boys?
I marked Comer a few times. I didn't mark Walsh. He was more out the pitch, like as kind of a corner forward going out maybe.
Yeah.
And then maybe sometimes in the half forward line.
Comer looks incredibly physical. Is that how he plays?
So I marked Comer down in Galway, and the one thing I learned from playing him is that do not try tackle him when he's trying to engage with you. Because it wouldn't be any more physical than a Michael Murphy or a Donnchadh or any of those kind of big target men. Like I wouldn't have felt. He's much smaller than them lads, and he's probably more grounded, centre of gravity lower. But his habit was that he wanted to bounce off your contact to either show his physicality or. So all you had to do was step off a little bit, and then he just filter it back. So he wants the crowd to bring energy up by winning a big ball and turning and knocking you off balance and scoring, which a lot of defenders, it's like a magnet. Like they connect to that, like thinking that this is the way to mark this guy, and it's not. And when you step off a little bit, once you've got numbers around you, he won't run at you. But if he's 1-on-1 and that ball's gone in fast. And I think that's something that Galway should have got after a little bit more the last day when they went long in the kickouts. They got joy, but they didn't bang it into him. So it's like literally being a step ahead of what's the next play. So the ball kicked out. Who's the midfielder winner? Who's the ball? The kicker kicking it in. Like there's very few kickers of the ball nowadays. And that's what's happening with these forwards. They're being starved.
And that's probably why John Maher is now sitting on the bench and Sean Mulcairn is in instead of him and Liam Silk is there, and that's the reordering. But Galway there's quite a strong element this year of unsung heroes about Galway, players we wouldn't necessarily think would lead in the way that they've led. And you mentioned Dylan McHugh, and that's one. And he admitted himself last week at the Galway press day that he struggled to make his own club team just 4 or 5 years ago. And here he is now, favourite for Footballer of the Year. And the other player is John Maher. John Maher has been incredible. He's obviously, to everybody, he's a throwback to an old school, bustling midfielder, centre forward that'll engage in contact. And his first thing is to look for contact. He makes those tackles. He's been a revelation for them. Yeah,
but they have these lads that are like, generally industrious is kind of the style I would say. Like, even Conroy, like you look at Conroy and I'm like, is he not retired yet? Like, he's there for ages, like, and he's still popping up getting these scores. But the donkey work they do to let the likes of a Walsh or these flamboyant type of players to play, like that's the ingredients you need to win big games. Like
simple thing right over and over again, particularly in that semi-final. I thought that was his trademark. There's just no fuss, no frills. But when it came to it, I think I remember fisting one over the bar, and it was just exactly the right thing that needed in that moment. Just do it, get it done, keep a thing ticking over, and like very few mistakes. And like when you're operating at this level, the mistakes are the things, and turnovers are the things that give the other team oxygen. So if you have someone there who 99% of the time does the right thing, shovels it on, does the right thing, it's invaluable.
Sean Kelly has obviously missed the last game. He came off against Dublin. He's the captain. I remember last year in Carrick-on-Shannon in the game that they played, and he was absolutely brilliant. He scored a goal that day. I think he was fouled for the penalty. He makes these runs, and yet he was clearing ball off his end line. He was going so well, and he picked up an injury, and he probably hasn't been right since. And you get a sense in an All-Ireland final, I know we talk about injuries in Galway and next man up, but he gets them over the gain line. He is such a direct.
Do you think he'll start?
I don't think so. I don't know. I don't know how right or he's back training, but he's missed chunks of time, and I just think he's not playing to his maximum. Him at his very best brings Galway a long way. He was so good in that game against Armagh last year.
It's a hard one, isn't it? Because like how do you showcase how good you are if you're playing against a certain style of a team? You know, like, so as a full back, to showcase how good you are, you have to go man to man with somebody, and you have to, at the end of the game, look back and go, right, that man didn't kept him scoreless, or he got very few shots off, or. But when you play teams that maybe are a bit more defensive, bar Dublin, which we do get defensive, by the way, do get men behind the ball as well, and that means they transition a bit slower up the pitch. It's much easier to defend. Yeah. So it's very hard for you to look on and go, I remember watching him and he was like clearing out his man and he was getting up the pitch. Like when you play, particularly northern teams, it does allow the full back line and the half back line to attack. You know, you're going to be dragged out of your own defensive structure to get forward, to make that numerical advantage, to possibly get your shots off. So, and again, you just haven't seen enough of him. But I do think he'll be, I agree with you, I think he won't start. I think they'll look at Armagh's strength towards the end of the game in the semis and say, right, they have a strong squad, they've got lads coming off the bench that have experience, and I think that's what Galway will need as well. So having him coming off the bench is a serious option, you know.
It kind of depends on how far along he is, doesn't it? Because if he is a real risk and is at the risk of breaking down again, if you bring him on for down the home stretch and he breaks down, you have to take him off. It's 2 subs, you know. So it might, in some ways, if he is a risk, in some ways it might be better to start him and try and get the 20 minutes out of him and keep someone else in reserve.
He's a full back though. So if he doesn't do well,
I think his best position is full back. I don't think he's as effective from midfield. I think he's
coming from
so
deep
good
anyway,
making those runs
from
deep
all day. But look, if he was fit, there's a good chance that he would be on obviously one of Galway's top players.
Oh yeah,
do you know what I mean? So if you start him on one of the top players, you're probably going to risk him even more of breaking down, or if something happens, if it's tight enough to the goal, that it's a big mistake that happens. You're going to go, Jesus, would you risk it?
He had a couple of never-ending seasons back to back, didn't he? Like I remember
with Mike Cullen, he had that in between, and he was back out quick. And you know, you look at the Derry players this year, and you look at the Glen players from Derry this year, and you look at even the Cliffords, and you wonder about that continuous cycle of county to club, and just the Cliffords around.
Whereas Chemical Crows didn't have a huge amount of players that were playing for Dublin. Like I know they got to the latter stages, like, but they didn't get all the way.
Yeah, and Paul Mannion has missed chunks of time, and he knows when to take his breaks as well. And maybe the onus isn't as great on him to get back and play with Dublin in a league. He comes back when obviously the time is right for him and the team, but it's not maybe. The imperative isn't there as much as it would be in Galway or maybe even Kerry. So, you know, you look at that and say maybe there's something in it. They have a great rivalry over the last 3 years. This is one of the best rivalries that has developed. You know, obviously the 2022 game went to extra time and penalties, and there was that controversial incident over. But even that game in Carrick on Shannon this year against in Sligo, pedestrian first half, but a game really broke out, and significantly Galway went 5 points up in that game and looked very comfortable, and then they're turned over from the kick out, short kick out, rare for Galway, and Armagh are back in the game, but Galway did lead by 5 points. Is that a sign that maybe they are capable of getting ahead and maybe this time staying ahead?
Well, I think it's a trait that's a key component to any team to get to an All-Ireland final. And if you look at the teams that have won them over the years, that no matter what, if you're 2 or 3 points down, there's no panic. You're sticking to the cliche thing, the process. And I suppose Donegal were brilliant at that this year. Like they were always kind of, you know, a couple of points behind. But if you look at even Donegal, the way they kind of clawed back games, Armagh are really good for it as well. And that is that concentration endurance piece where you kind of have to look around your teammates and say, hold on, we've a job to do in each play. Don't think about the scoreboard, don't think about the outcome. We're just doing every play. What are you doing for your kick out after we get this shot off? What are you doing for your defensive structure? How are we? So everything is kinetic. It's all linked. It's not right. We set up a defence to defend, and then that's it. It's like we set up the defence to defend, and then we attack, and then we defend. So all of those plays
in by learning in the moment, like by being there and pulling it off and doing it a little bit better next time you're there. Exposure
to the what ifs, I think, is crucial there. Like, you know, and I've no doubt in training sessions that most inter-county teams are going, right, okay, we're 2 points down. How do we react? What way do players react to that? can we get the next score? What's the right options? You know, are we getting it to the right shooters? Are we doing the right things, essentially? Like, you know, and there's times where you watch games and you see a team in a blanket defence, and you'd see the full forward and one of their main shooters staying in the full forward line. You're like, you're not getting a shot in there. You should be swapping there with a corner back. You know, in the melting pot of a game, you need to be getting around the D or in around an area where you can get a shot off. You're no good in the full forward line. So little things like that probably teams are looking at that and kind of going, that's something that you might think of. I think they're the exposures to adversity in training that you need good coaching for. You know, so that's what we would have got with Dublin over the years. You know, making sure that we've looked at every angle that we can adapt to on the pitch.
Would you have had much experience of playing against McGeeney's Armagh? There is that infamous challenge match from 2015.
You were dying to bring that up, weren't you?
You didn't play. You didn't play in that. But it's 9 years on, so you're among friends.
Yeah, no, I didn't play that game. I think we had a game a couple of days before that. So it was the guys that were on the fringes or got very little time in that game that played it. It was an interesting game. I actually watched some of it because we had to do runs and then get in and get showered and then come over and watch it. So I missed the incident, but I was there for the game. It wasn't really, because there was a bit of a row before it, it wasn't really as physical as I thought, like, you know, that this is going to, you know, turn into something again. You know, it just died off. It just died. I don't know if lads were jittery after the row or whatever happened. I don't know what happened, you know.
It gathered in for me really because, you know, there was that wall of silence at the time, wasn't there? You know, and I think it was in Pádraig Duffy's report at the end of the year. It was checked in it for, I think, the lack of cooperation. You kind of hit it. I think everything I've heard about it since is along those lines. It was sort of like there was that moment and maybe not a whole lot else after it.
Yeah, I think Boric mentioned the Omerta, that they couldn't get information. But generally, would you have seen yourself more as an Armagh player or a Galway player in the context of the current team?
Any Ulster team, I would have loved to play with. Like, you know, I would have been an Ulster style, I'd say, as a footballer. But I also played football as well, so I'd have probably a little bit of both to me. Like, I don't think Galway are the most expansive type football team, but they are out of the teams that are left between them and Armagh. But I do think they bring a bit of physicality as well. Like, I just think these two teams are so evenly matched.
A lot of physicality. Galway, we mentioned John Maher, but Matthew Tierney's a big fella too. That there's potential in him to go another level as well. I think
it's easy to fall into that trap that, you know, from going back to again to that 98-01 team that Galway or Kerry are the stylists, and maybe that Armagh are bringing the sort of the tough stuff. I think everyone playing at this, we said it earlier, everyone playing at this, great, they're all playing a fairly similar type of game, and they have to have a lot of the same attributes. There's no one going out now this weekend and doing the beautiful stuff and someone else is just involved in the dark arts. I mean, need to be plenty of both.
I think Pádraig Joyce in the last 3 years especially has brought a sense of pragmatism in how he selects his team, and we referenced John Daly. He's prepared to make that change. He's prepared to make those calls. John Maher is a player that, you know, some county managers may not be drawn to him, but what he brings in that level of industry. So I think he has changed, and you referenced you would have been surprised that he's taken him that far. But he's been open in terms of taking Cian O'Neill, a very experienced football coach, in, and obviously he had Bernard Dunn for years, so he's been open to ideas in that regard.
I do. Like, look, he's not, like, I've spoke to Pádraig a few times. He was watching a couple of Ulster games, and he's an interesting guy. He's honest as well. Like, I've had a proper chat with him, like, and spoke about certain lads, and he didn't speak too much about, you know, in-house stuff, but he broadly spoke about, you know, the setup and stuff like that, and some of it was very interesting. So he's very smart in what he does. Not to be overshadowed, that style of management that he is, that I'm, you know, fan or not a fan of, but I do think he's a Galway legend. He's won an All-Ireland. He's got them to now the second All-Ireland. You have to buy into that, like, and no matter what style of player you think it suits what you like as an individual, he has these lads that fit roles and fit jobs, and that's the way he's gone about his business. And I think that's the strength in him, and that's the strength in his management team and where they are today.
So, where is this game going to be won or lost? Donnchadh, in your view? What are the key components for a Galway win?
I think we touched on the experience piece earlier, and that could be very significant. So I suppose I did a piece with Paul Grimley last week, and he was just talking about how mad the county was and how big it was going to be for everyone, and keeping a lid on it was a proper consideration for them. I think that's going to be something like how they handle the occasion, because as we've spoken about how they've come out on the wrong side of it. They could have been psychologically damaged by any of those penalty shootouts, by all the near misses that they've had over the while, and now all of a sudden they find themselves like, can they, no more than Galway after they beat Dublin, can they ensure that their All-Ireland wasn't the All-Ireland semi-final against Kerry, and that massive significant result that it was isn't the be-all and end-all? And that was absolutely the theme of the press night. It was like, there's nothing won yet, this is only there's another step to go, and they repeated that over and over. I think if they can get into the right frame of mind, I wouldn't be terribly surprised to see extra time. I know we only saw it yesterday. I would not be terribly surprised to see extra time. In terms of a Galway win, I suppose like it's the fitness of those key players that we've been talking about all year. If they are fit, maybe they have a slight edge, but it's so difficult to call. Like, you know, you looked at how Armagh finished the game the last day with some really important players coming off the bench making huge contributions, and that could be really significant as well. Like, going to my head, I'm probably saying slight leaning to Galway, but you know, with absolutely no conviction whatsoever. But again, wouldn't be surprised if we saw extra time.
You've been, you know, looking at quite a few Ulster games over the last few years through your BBC analysis, and you've seen this Armagh team grow, and the support they bring everywhere. It's hard to shield yourself from that, and some of the scenes in some of the villages too. Do you switch off your phone? Is it possible to keep away from it? Obviously, you have to work, you have to live. It's hard to avoid it.
It's a key component of getting to an All-Ireland final, that you can block out that noise, but not block it out in a way that you kind of go, right, I'm not listening to you, F off to somebody. It's actually like, okay, I'm taking that information in, you see me as a footballer, but I have a trigger to kind of, you know, say, okay, I've processed that. This person I have to be respectful to, whether they say you're winning All-Ireland or you're winning 2 in a row or whatever else, you're kind of going, no, I respect that, but we have to put a big performance in, and you're bringing it back to your performance. So I think it's a key element to this, because from an Armagh point of view, I agree with you, Donnchadh, because I didn't like Rian O'Neill's energy in the interview after the game. I didn't like the emotion in it. And people go, sure, Philly, like, you know, emotion's great. But
he's reaching his first All-Ireland final.
I get that.
The game is just over. It's not the best time to bring it all down. You have to celebrate a moment when you beat Kerry. They've only beaten Kerry.
I didn't say you don't have to celebrate.
Yes.
I think you have to be emotionally controlled. And we've played teams where I've looked at interviews of certain individuals I've marked, and I've seen their energy after games. In particular, replays of All-Ireland finals, and I would just be like focused on the next game. And yeah, you might think, oh, geez, you're a robot, blah, blah, blah. But no, not for me. Like, when you see that energy, and Armagh still could win it, but these are little things that I would use as an opponent for energy. I'd be looking at that and going, in that moment, right? In that moment, from that to the media night where it was more, we've one more to go. That's different. That's, you're losing emotional control and you're losing focus of what the bigger goal is. That's you kind of going. It's like what you do after a final, isn't it? That's like what you do after a final. You kind of go, oh, don't give a shit about anything else here. I'm going to just let go. I don't have any kind of media constraints. And that was a little bit of a worry. I was looking at it from being in the media up in the Hogan stand, looking down and going, ooh, calm down there now, relax. Now, he's probably a player that won't affect at all.
I don't think he would be.
No, I don't think so. He's such a good player.
I think he will always take on the shots, regardless of whether he's up or down. He will take shots all day, and he takes some very good ones. He scored 3 great scores, 3 great points in Sligo that day, and obviously the last day. He's a wonderful kicker of the ball and passer of the ball. But again, I suppose they've been through so many near misses with penalties. There was just a release.
Exactly.
There is a release there that
it was their
release.
Yeah. So
the first time they, as you said, they put themselves properly in the top bracket.
But then McGeeney was going around saying one more to every single one of them. If you watched it, he was going around them going one more. And again, unless you get to that level, you wouldn't have seen that energy in a Galway player. I'm not
Would you
saying
probably-
this is
would
the
you
winning
see
and
that
losing
after
of
the
it.
Dublin game, but Philly, because that was such a.
You would have seen it.
I think Galway, like when after they beat Dublin, it was massive for them. I think that was
Yeah.
evident. You could probably draw parallels.
Did you see anybody doing an interview where they were like energised as much as Reen was after the
I
Armagh?
remember off the top of my head, but like I don't doubt for a moment that they celebrate that result hard. That
I think, but I think is taking this. I think you celebrate your wins, but together in house, not publicly, unless you've got over the line, is in winning the final. I think that's where you need to get your headspace.
Like I'd imagine you were much better at that stuff in 19 and 20 than you were in 11. You know what I mean? These boys are maybe not
Well,
Galway.
not really. Like I think 2011, we got beaten in 2010 in an All-Ireland semi-final, so we knew our goal wasn't to get to a final. Our goal was to win it. You know. So, and again, look, we were very lucky that we were exposed by the media a lot more than other counties. So we had to have somebody there as a media person, probably to come over and go, right, you're doing an interview for RTE or whoever it is, BBC. I need you to, you know, this is calm down. This is what you're going to be saying, like. And we would all have those thoughts in our heads, what we're going to say. It'd be the same thing.
Yeah.
But it's just that person just to calm you down a little bit and kind of go, right, okay, we've got one more match to go here.
Is that projection of emotion? Do you think it's that significant? Do you think it can act? Does it change the energy in the group if it goes wrong, or you know?
The person I was, I looked for every little bit of energy to take going into a final. Every little bit, like whatever that may be. My opponents, for me, I was looking at it kind of going, right. And even to the fact I would have thought, I don't drink alcohol. He does. Or maybe he doesn't, but I'm thinking he does. Right? Stupid little things like that that built up my confidence, because confidence means you have the answers to everything in that particular event.
You look behind now and think that's stupid, but you didn't at the time.
No, I didn't at the time, because I bought into it.
Yeah.
And that was my belief. And whatever you believe, a belief is something that you think is true.
Yeah.
So they were all my extra little inches to get over my opponent.
Did you do anything else in particular on the run up to All-Ireland finals? Like, were you delete Twitter off the phone, lock yourself
No.
merchant, or?
No, I didn't find social media a problem.
Right.
And once you don't find it a problem, it's another belief. If you find it a problem, then that's a belief that you think it's going to be a problem. So I never really engaged massively on social media up to finals, but I certainly didn't delete it, because I think if it's a part of your life already and you delete it, then you're going to feel like you're missing something. So it's going to impact you negatively. And some lads do delete it and feel it helps them, but for me, I didn't think it was.
Do these little psychological triggers, I suppose you call them, did you learn them over time? Did you get them off the sports psych you had with Dublin? Was it your own stuff, or how did? Just
through trial and error over the years. Like, you know, I didn't change much. I wasn't very superstitious. The build up of the week of the game, I worked. I actually remember one year going to bed too early and hearing kids out in the street and going, what am I doing in bed here? Get up. You know, like stupidly, like, you know. So I did learn over the years. Maybe I sat beside Stephen Cluxon on the bus on the way to Croker. That was the only kind of thing I'd be doing. That was kind of routine, like, you know. But I was always in the mindset that, you know, if you think into something too much regarding superstitious things, then that will impact your performance. But the key for me was ticking the boxes. And one box would have been, it's not going to be perfect, Philly. You are going to go into an All-Ireland final feeling tight somewhere. You're going to make a mistake, but you got to be adaptable. You know, you got to find the trigger to get yourself back in the game if you make a mistake. Because you're probably two mistakes, your third one away from being taken off. That's the level you're at. Like, so it's 2 kick passes went astray. Okay, it's a little hand pass next one, and you're thinking of that. And then you're thinking of your strategy, and you're thinking of your teammates, and you're thinking of putting the other fella off, and there's so much going on, but it's all about milliseconds and choices. And I would build an image now. If I was a Galway player or an Armagh player, I'd be building an image now as the week goes on, like a rocket about to take off. Controlling my energy at the start of the week, but I'm building an image. What's that going to look like? And what happens if something happens that I don't want to happen? Okay, this is where I'm going to go. And you're always having the answers. And that's what builds confidence.
Did you ever get swallowed up by anything? Any of the big of the occasion, or be it in the moment, which is I'm after shipping a couple of pints here? Did you ever get on top
in the finals?
Well, any big occasion?
I suppose when you played in finals, at like so many of them, when you go back down to like a league game or the early stages of a championship game, the pressure drops so much, like, you know, but you're still then looking over your shoulder to see, is there a player coming to take your jersey, like, you know. So that's where the management were so strong over the years for us, that you know, And again, it's very hard to kind of put your finger on things when you underperformed, but you can relate back to your preparation. Like if a team wins this weekend and a team loses, you can generally say, and sometimes you can't in finals, but generally you can say that game was lost before the game was played. I think that's, when you look at sports performance, that's the area that's so fascinating for me. Like the games are lost and won well before they're played.
We get a prediction off you, or maybe a projection how the game is going to go and how it ends and who's holding a cup that you're very familiar with.
I'm struggling. I'm really struggling for an obvious answer here to who I think will win it. Like I've biased towards Armagh because I'm walking up there. I've Northern blood in me, so I'm biased. I have to be honest. I'm in a way obviously disappointed Dublin are not there, but I do understand that there's a lot of people that are saying, you know what, the cup is going somewhere new. That's great. I think it's great for football, but I think there's a couple of key areas to look at. I think if you look at Donegal, how many scores, their scores they got from short kickouts, I think that's a weakness in Galway. Right? I think they're up to nearly 70-80% conversion rate from short kickouts in the semi-final. Donegal were. So I think that's something that you should be saying, right? If you're dropping back into a defensive system, surely that ratio should be lower, right? And that's what Armagh, I think, should look at, right? I do think Armagh and Galway should look at Armagh's turnovers. I think they're going to be critical because they do turn the ball a lot. They turn it over a lot. And Galway do hold men up. So if they don't release the ball after turning the ball over, they're missing a big opportunity. So they're the two key things. And kickouts is a big, it's a big thing.
All bar one of their kickouts against Donegal last time. I don't think that will happen against this Armagh team. But it was a huge return for a team that more often than not will let that ball long into that half forward line. So
that's a key area. Yeah, it's a key area that they need. But it's not about winning that kick out, it's about what they get returned from the kick out. And you can bring everything back to the origin of scores. Right? So that's your key metric. Where did you get your scores from? Where did they get the scores from? And that's where you build your plan out from. So if Galway get a lot of joy from long kickouts, but they don't get a return in terms of scores or short to score ratio, what's the point in going long? If they can get short and get a higher ratio, go for it. But I do think Galway will go for that long kick out because they have a higher probability of getting scores considering they'll hold players up the pitch. And you'll see Colm coming out for kick outs. He done it against me. He runs from in around top of the day and he run down the sideline and they'll swap.
Got a memorable one against Mayo in the Connacht final as well coming out. He was terrific in that game. Obviously he picked up injuries after that. So
I think you'll see a point in the game where both teams will be forced to go for it for some extent and come out of that, the safer stuff, and send it long. And that's when the stage of the game, we're talking about how brilliant the hurling was, that's the stage of the game where the most potential is for the game to take off and be an absolute classic, where the ball, they need to get the ball up to fish. Maybe one team is chasing it a little bit and they have to go for it and come out. And that's the moment I think that you could potentially see a brilliant game of football.
So we've Galway. We've undecided, but a slight leaning towards Armagh.
I'm slightly towards
Extra
Armagh.
Given familiarity, I think Galway slightly. I think they've just got round winning those tight games almost to a T, and I just think they'll make more use of their resources ever so slightly. You'd have to be impressed by the way what McGeeney has drawn out of the team and with some of the players. You see Barry McCambridge picking up Clifford, scoring a goal. He was so good against Derry in attacking as well, and he's picked up the most difficult task. He'd probably pick up Shane Walsh as he did in Sligo, but all round just see in a tight finish Galway having the edge. So that's it, lads. Thank you very, very much for your contribution, Donnchadh and Philly, and we will talk again. Thank you.